Good morning. Welcome to the Art and Microbes part of the Tacos Summer Camp. My name is Bailey Russell. I teach photography at the University of Wyoming, and I will be guiding you for the next couple days through some art projects. We will be using a process called the cyanotype, which is a very old photographic printing process, and we'll be using microbes as our source material throughout this week. Today, I just wanted to start us off by talking about what we'll be doing, what you have in this bag that you've been given, and what other materials you need to get. So I'm going to jump into a little PowerPoint presentation right now, and then we will start making some photographs. So you have a bag that you've been given. Inside this bag are a handful of different things, so I wanted to talk about them first. One of them is a sealed black plastic bag that should say, "Do not open" on it. Do not open it. At least don't open it whenever there is sunlight near you. Inside that bag are a bunch of different cyanotype coated papers and cloths, 3 sheets of paper, 6 sheets of plain white cloth, and 5 sheets of colored cloth. If you have a bathroom that doesn't have any windows or a large closet or something like that, or if it's nighttime, you can open it and look through it and see what the things are, check them out. But make sure that you seal it back up if you're going into sunlight. You can open this in the shade really quickly and pull things out of it, so you don't need to be incredibly paranoid about it, but just try to keep things from leaking. Try to keep the light from leaking into it as much as possible. You should also have a sheet of plexiglass, 2 sheets of black construction paper, and a small assortment of laser cut microbes of different sorts. You're going to need a couple additional things throughout this week for my part of the class. One of them is a bucket or a large Tupperware container. We're going to be processing sheets of paper and sheets of cloth, so something to dunk them in would be useful. Preferably, this should be a little bit bigger than the largest sheets of paper, since you can't really scrunch those up. But you can make do with what you have. I'll show a couple different types of containers when I do the first demonstrations. You need a pair of scissors, a pen and a pencil, a water source that could be either inside that you can come and go to, or a spigot outside. And sort of most important of all, you need direct sunlight. So if today is a really cloudy day, if it's raining all day today, which really doesn't happen very much in Wyoming, but if it is a cloudy day, I would recommend putting this off, doing some of the other projects today, and then coming back to the cyanotype project when it is sunny tomorrow. If it's super wonderful and sunny, you should be all good. But you'll need a place where you can get to that has direct sunlight. If you have some really nice windows, you could do this inside as long as it's direct sunlight. But most likely you'll be going outside and doing this on your lawn or on the front sidewalk or somewhere like that. So, as I said, we're going to be working with cyanotypes, which leads to the question of what is a cyanotype? You can look at the name. It gives you a little bit of information. Cyan is a color. It's a sort of bluish color. And type, in this case, means print. So we're talking about a bluish colored print. It was a photographic process that was discovered in 1842. So that's a long time ago. It's one of the very early photographic processes. It is iron-based. So most photographic processes pre-digital photography were all silver-based. The reason for that is that silver is very light sensitive. It's fast, so it doesn't need a whole lot of light to make an image. And it's also stable, as in you can make an image and it will stay there. And it's a little bit cheaper than things like gold or platinum. Iron, on the other hand, is way cheaper than silver. You can get iron very easily. So it was preferable in that way. It had its drawbacks, which was that it was blue. The world in blue and white is not quite as wonderful in terms of artistic output, in terms of representing things, as the world that is black and white. It's made up of 2 different chemicals, potassium ferrocyanide and ferric ammonium citrate. There is a sort of dangerous looking word in there, cyanide, but don't worry about this. This is all very safe and benign, all these chemicals. You don't want to drink it, obviously, But if you get a little bit on your hands, which you will, it's not the end of the world. You can just wash your hands and it should go away. It might stain you a tiny bit blue, but you should be fine. Don't dip your clothes into the liquid when you are processing. But just be careful and you'll be okay. That's the chemical formula for it. It's pretty complex, as you can see. And then the final interesting thing about cyanotypes are that it is very slow. By slow, we mean it needs a lot of light to make an image. So silver processes, very fast. You have a roll of film in an old-fashioned camera, and you can take a picture in a 1,000th of a second, a 10,000th of a second. Really, really quick, fast exposures that will freeze the world, which allows for sports photography and all these other sorts of things. This is a very slow process. We're going to be sticking our sheets of cyanotype paper out in the sun for, on really bright sunny days, 10 minutes. On a cloudy day, 20 minutes. So you need a lot of light to make an image happen. So that's a limitation to this. You can't do a lot of things with it, but it also allows you to do some other fun things with it. What has it traditionally been used for? Well, back in the day, they would use it for cheap contact prints. Contact print is when you take a negative, which is what people used to make photographs out of. That would be a piece of transparency with a negative image on it, and you put it on top of a sheet of paper that's been sensitized, and you shine light through it for a long time. Mostly just to see what you have. You've taken a bunch of pictures on a roll of film, you've developed the roll of film, you get it back from the lab, and you don't know what your pictures look like. So this would be a way to have it, check it out, see what it looks like very quickly. Photograms, that's what we're going to be doing mostly with it. This is where you put an object directly onto a sheet of paper. So we'll be making photograms, we'll be doing exposures outside like that. And the final thing, which is sort of fascinating, is that these were used for blueprints back in the day. They would draw a design for a building onto a large sheet of transparency. So you'd be drawing in black ink onto transparency, and then you take that huge sheet and you'd stick it on a sheet of cyanotype paper, expose it, and you would have a negative picture of the building. So you'd have a huge blue sheet of paper, a blueprint, with the building drawn in white on it. So that was one of the main uses of it. So with that taken care of, we are going to make our first image right now. So you can pause this video. Now would be a great time to do it. And the thing that you need right now is the bucket full of water. So go find a Tupperware, a large Tupperware, bigger than 6 inches by 6 inches, 6 inches by 7 inches roughly, hopefully, and put some water in it. And if you're going to do this outside, put it in somewhere shady outside. And I'm going to show you all this in a little bit when I transfer to the other camera. But set it in the shade, filled up with water. If you're going to do this inside, you can put it in a bathroom, you can do anything like that, and put it off somewhere not in direct sunlight. So go ahead, pause me, and get to that. And also grab your black bag and set it out. And the final thing you're going to do before we come back is find something to make an image of. I'm going to show you a couple of the things when we come back onto the other camera, but we're looking at leaves or flowers or other things like that, things that are two-dimensional, that means flat, and things that we can put onto a sheet of paper that are smaller than our sheets of paper, so smaller than about this, so leaves or grasses or other things like that. So again, I will show you a little bit more what I'll be using, and you can pause it again to go search for stuff when we get around to that. But that's about it for now. Hello, welcome back. Hopefully during this pause you've been able to find a bucket or a large Tupperware, fill it with water, and place it somewhere in the shade in your backyard or in a bathroom if you're working inside. And also just found a nice sunny area where you can make your exposure. I'm going to walk you through what I have set up here in the backyard, and also walk you through different types of grasses or other things that could be useful for an exposure, and also show you a couple things that you don't really want to use for your first exposure. So let's take a look. All right, so this is my backyard, and over here I have a bucket and a Tupperware set up, just so I can show you what each one of them, how each one of them would work. The Tupperware is a little bit on the small side, but it should work for this. You'll just have to do a little bit of weird dipping. And the bucket, maybe a little bit of dirty, but that's okay. That will work for us. Over here, I have a work area set up. So this is a nice sunny area. One thing to pay attention to is where the trees are. You don't want to set up too close to any shadows because shadows move, and 10 minutes is a pretty long period of time. So if you set up your exposure and the shadow starts to move onto the image during the exposure, there's not a lot you can do to it. So you want to make sure that you are nice and clear of everything. The other thing to do is just to check the sky. I'm going to look up now and make sure that there are maybe clouds, but there aren't clouds directly towards the sun, because you want to have a nice even exposure throughout the entire duration of the 10 minutes. I've got a couple things set up here on this. On the right side, you see some flowers and some grass and some leaves. And on the left side, you see some other things. So on the right side, these are things that would be particularly nice to use for an exposure. The reason is that they're flat and they're detailed, and they're not too large and just sort of amorphous blobby shapes. So these sorts of flowers will be really nice right here. They'll press down. I mean, they might have a little bit of three-dimensionality to them, but they'll be okay. Particularly these types of grasses are really, really nice to use because they have so much detail in them, and they'll work really nicely for the cyanotypes. The leaves are large, so they'll take up a huge amount of space, and if you think about it, basically they're just going to block the view entirely. So they're just going to be a white blob in the shape of that leaf, which, you know, could be nice or it could not be very nice. Over here, we have things that are going to be a little bit harder to deal with. The reason is that we are using plexiglass, and plexiglass needs to sit on top. So if you look at them from this angle, you see that they are three-dimensional. That means they're tall. So it's going to be hard to put the plexiglass on top of them. The rocks also are just sort of rock-shaped. They don't really have any particular shape. They're going to be hard to recognize when you make an image, so they're not that interesting in that way. This could make a really nice image, but it's going to be a little bit hard to press down. If there's really direct hard sun, no cloud cover whatsoever, and there's not much wind, which is sort of a rarity here in Wyoming, you could use these without the plexiglass and just stick them on top of the paper, and that would look really nice. But that's sort of rarely the case. And the pine cone is also just sort of a blobby shape. So lots of times things look really interesting, but they aren't actually as interesting as they could be when you make a cyanotype, make a photogram out of them. The last thing to say is that before you start to cut anything or pick anything or whatever, you might want to check with your parents to make sure that it's okay to do it. There might be flowers or other things that they really like that you wouldn't necessarily be allowed to pick. So go out now, maybe pause this video as we switch it to the next thing, and go find a couple different things that you want to make an image of. As you see right now, by the way, it just got a little dark. So the sun just went behind a cloud, and it looks from looking up there that it will be behind a cloud for a little while. So I'm gonna wait until the sun comes out and is nice and clear before I do the next part of which is to start the next exposure. Okay, feel free to pause this right now and go find what you want to take a picture of. All right, we are now ready to make an image. There's a nice, beautiful, direct sunlight going on. So I'm gonna walk into this building over here where I have my bag of paper stored. So here's the paper down here. What you want to do is you want to be very careful when pulling paper out, especially if you have a little bit of ultraviolet light surrounding you. So what I'm going to do is very carefully reach into here, grab one sheet, pull it out, and then press the sheet emulsion side towards me against my chest when I walk outside. So there's the sheet right there. Seal up the rest of the paper, and as you see, I'm walking with it right up against my chest as I do the rest of this. So I'm going to walk over here and place this back onto the tripod, and there you should be able to see where I'm setting up. So right over here, I'm going to use my body to block the sun as best as I can. You want to do everything in the shade as much as you can. I'm going to place the sheet of paper down, put the items I want on it. See, I'm going to do the 4 flowers and then maybe the grasses off to the or along the bottom and the sides of the image. Use them to frame it. And then I'm going to place the plexiglass on top of it. The plexiglass should pretty much cover the whole thing. and then I'm going to step to the side. Now I'm going to go over here and start my timer. And now we've got a 10-minute timer going on. During that 10-minute timer, we're going to look at some images that we've done in the past, all right? So let's pull this whole thing over here. And you'll also be able to see what happens to the cyanotype as this exposure goes on. So let's see, what's the best way to do this? There we go. You can see the image right there, and you can see everything else. So over here, I've got some pieces of cloth that we made last year, or that I've made with my daughter in the last year or two. These are all colored cloth. So you have a couple pieces like this in your bag. I think you've got 5 pieces of white cloth and maybe 6 pieces of this colored one. The colors are in a couple different colors. So if you look at the back of it, it's a solid color of one sort, pink or yellow or blue or even green. And then the front of it has an image over that color. So these are all negative images. So right here, if you're looking at this, what you see here is some of the grasses, like we just sort of made an image out of. It's a little faded looking, but where the grasses are, it's the color yellow. And where there was nothing blocking the light, it's the color blue, which is the color of the cyanotype material. So this is what we're working on. We're basically working on negative images. Wherever we block the light, we're going to get a image in the shape of our object, but there won't be any tone to it. And wherever we allow the light to hit it, it will be a nice intense blue color, or whatever combines with blue. So looking at a couple different ones of these, here is what some leaves would look like, just plain leaves. There you go. Just solid objects on it. They don't have a lot of detail within them, but you can see there's a little bit of tone around the edges, and this is where it lifts three-dimensionally off the sheet of cloth, so it wasn't quite pressed down there. So what happened is that the light just sort of went underneath the leaf a little bit, and so exposed it a tiny bit below. Let's see if we can find some other interesting ones. This is a strange one. What do you think this is? It's just sort of a large, spiky object. Sort of looks like a pineapple maybe, but it's way too small to be a pineapple. This is actually a pine cone. So it's a fairly large pine cone. It's just sort of solid in the middle because the pine cone blocked the light going to the sheet of cloth. So all you get is that solid yellow tone, and then you get the edges, the scalloped edges around the sides of it. You can make different designs. This is one that I just did with my daughter. Let's see if we can put this out here and you guys can see it. A little harder to see. I'm going to pull this off here and we will go look at it close up. All right. So what you have here are some large leaves with some other flowers and smaller leaves and patterns around it. So you can make really nice patterns out of it. We're going to talk about that on the second or third day. We'll talk about different rules of composition and how to create designs that are very pleasing and interesting. What types of rules there are, how you can break the rules, other things like that. We're going to be starting with white cloth, and we'll be moving to the colored cloths eventually. But for the first couple images, we'll be using white cloth. So looking at our image right now, we are, let's see, how long have we been going? We have about halfway done, almost 5 minutes done. And if you look at it, it's sort of started to turn a slightly grayer tone. If we were to pick up any of those flowers at the moment, you would see a silhouette underneath them, a darker silhouette, which is sort of interesting because it's going to invert when we process it. It starts off as entirely one tone. The areas that the light hits sort of fade and bleach out, But then when we process it, those areas come back to be a strong blue tone, and the areas that stayed the darker tone wash away entirely and go to pure white. So that's sort of fun to see. Luckily, we've got really nice sun going now. I set up just a little bit too close to this tree up there, so I'm going to have to move this for the second exposure so that we don't get tree starting to come down and covering up our image. The other thing to be careful about is yourself, your body. If you look at the image right now, you'll see, oh no, my shadow's over it. It's not a big deal if that just happens for a tiny bit of time, but you don't want it to happen for too long. You want to let it be as obstructed as possible. The other thing that could cause a serious problem is if you hit it by accident. So let's say I jostled the table or nudged this a little bit. What's going to happen is that the images will move a little bit and you won't get quite as crisp and dark a design as you might want to have. So you want to stay as far away from possible and try to keep from affecting it or jostling it or just messing with your coded image as much as possible. All right, let's, I think we still have about 4 minutes. I'm going to check the timer. That's my dog barking. Sometimes she likes to bark. Yep, we have exactly 4 minutes. So let's talk about what's going to happen when this exposure is done. When I say, all right, go. I'm going to move this camera so it'll be a little farther away because I can't really hold the camera and do the processing at the same time. But what I'm essentially going to do is pull the plexiglass off, pick up the plexiglass, lean it to the side, pick up the paper and just carefully wipe off all the flowers and just let them sit down there on the board. And then I'm going to again take the paper, put it emulsion side, so that's image print side to my chest, and then walk over to the water bath. When I get to the water bath, I'm just going to simply take the image and stick it into the water. Dump it all the way down into the water. Saga thinks that some mail's getting delivered right now, so she's starting to start barking for a bit. I'm going to dump it all the way into the water and give it a little swish around, all right? If you don't have a whole lot of water in your container, what you'll want to do is wash it for a little bit. You'll see the water get a little bit dark blue in color, and then maybe go refill it, dump the water out and refill it. This is, as I said, pretty benign. You don't want to dump it into, flower gardens or anything like that, but dumping it on the ground is okay, or walking it back inside and dumping it down the sink is fine. You don't want to handle the print too much once it gets wet. This is a sheet of paper after all, and if you push it around, rip it, move it, it will get ripped and it will start to degrade a little bit. It gets a little fragile when it gets really wet. So just be in mind of that. When we get to the cloth, it's a lot easier to deal with. What we'll actually do with the cloth is just crumple it up into a little ball and put it straight into the water. Those are so easy to process. So that's what we'll be working on when we get to the timer. You want to be fairly fast and efficient about this. When we're done with the exposure, we want to get it into the water as quickly as possible. You don't want to wave this around, walk around a lot, do other things like that. We want to take it from here and walk it over to there. After we have done the full processing, which is basically wash it, get it in the water until either you can see nice clear white areas or you just don't see any more blue coming off the paper. Then what you want to do is dry it. For me, that's going to involve placing it on the grass in direct sunlight and maybe putting a couple little rocks on it. You could put it inside in a window on a blanket or on a towel of some sort or some paper towels. Just basically put it somewhere so that it has a good amount of sunlight hitting it, so it will evaporate off and dry pretty quickly, but where it won't blow away, because we live in Wyoming. It's very windy here, so everything will blow away if you let it go. So let's check to see what our time is. We got 1 minute left. So as I said before, in really nice, wonderful, direct sunlight, our exposure is probably around 10 minutes. This is middle of the day, really good sunlight. If you are doing this later in the evening, you're going to want to extend the time a little bit. If it is a little bit cloudy, there's a very gentle cloud cover, you're going to want to extend it. So those are all things that this first exposure will help tell you what to do. So something to do is, let's say it is not direct sunlight and you are extending the exposure a little bit. Let's say it's cloudy over, but still fairly bright. Maybe you want to do a 15-minute exposure. Do that exposure, and process it, and then write that down if you can. Write down 15 minutes on the back of it once it's dry. That way you'll know what it looked like, what 15 minutes was like. And next time you do an exposure, you can do it for a little bit longer, or a little bit shorter, depending on what you need. But as a rule of thumb, I'm going to say direct sunlight, 10 minutes. Oh, there's the timer. Direct sunlight, 10 minutes. A little bit of cloud cover, 15 minutes. Heavy cloud cover, 20 minutes. All right, I'm going to turn off the timer. I'm going to take my image, carefully take the plexiglass off, shake it a little bit. You see what it looks like now? It's really interesting. You've got these shapes, the blue shapes and the white right there, and all of that is the image that we're going to get. So I'm going to carry this to over here. I'm putting it against my chest. So you see my bucket right there? Let's see. I'm going to bring this over. Let's see if we can have you look into the bucket with me. It's a little bit difficult. All right, so I'm going to take this off. All right, you can see into the bucket. I'm going to take this image and submerge it in completely. So I put it in, and now I'm just leaving it alone. All right, you don't want to do too much to it, but you can see the image starting to appear. So right now, the areas that the flowers and the grass covered are staying sort of whitish yellowish color. That yellow will wash away eventually, and the rest of it is slowly getting darker and darker. Something that you can do if you have some of it is get some hydrogen peroxide. Hydrogen peroxide is a wonderful thing for cyanotypes. What it does is if you put a little bit into your wash water, it will oxidize the image. And when the image oxidizes, it turns a little bit darker. So oxidizing is adding oxygen to the iron. It will make the image a little bit darker, a little bit more intense. It looks really cool when you just sort of pour a tiny bit on it, and you'll see the entire image, intensify really quickly. We'll do that on one of the next exposures. But if you don't have hydrogen peroxide, don't worry about it, because what happens is you make this image, you pull it out, and maybe it's not that dark. Over the next 2 days, it's going to oxidize itself, and it's going to turn to that darkness level that it would get with hydrogen peroxide anyway. So it's just sort of a way to make it punchy and performative, but it's not actually necessary. You'll get the same image in the long run that you would get from this. So right now, if you look very carefully, you'll see in the flowers, it's still a little yellow. So I'm going to reach in here and give it a little bit of a wash around, and that yellow is actually just sitting on the surface in the water. It's not actually there anymore. So the yellow has, by and large, disappeared. So, looking pretty good. We have a nice little image with this. I'm going to give it just a tiny bit more time, and then we'll take it out to dry it. We're going to stop the camera, and we'll move on to the next part of this right now. But this is hopefully you've gotten your first image done. If you've just been watching this and then you're planning to do this all, I would say make one more image before you move on. Make one image before you move on to the next part of this video. So just stop it, go outside, do all these steps, time it yourself, and then come back inside and we will walk through the next part of it. Okay. Pulling it out now. It's a little fragile, you see, so you want to be a little careful. I just always use a flat hand and let the wetness of it just deal with it. So I'm going to drip it out a little bit all the way, and then we're going to walk it out into the sun and lay it out on some grass. All right. If it gets windy, I'll put a rock on it. And yeah, my dogs come over to say hi. Hello, Saga. This is Saga is her name. She's a wonderful old dog, but she's a little bit hot right now. All right, so this is drying. We are going to move on to the next part of this. Today by making one more exposure, but this time we're going to use some of the little microbes that came in your pack. So if you might have noticed, some very small little cardboard cutouts. These are laser cuts of microbes arrived with the rest of your stuff. Be very gentle with them. They're pretty fragile. And we're going to use these. We're not really going to talk too much about what microbes are yet. We'll deal with that tomorrow. But we're going to make one more image out of these guys. So as you can probably see, the sun has changed a little bit. So I no longer have nice, beautiful sun over on this table. So instead, we're going to work way over there instead. So I'm going to grab my microbes. I've got my sheet of paper. I'm going to open it up really quickly and press it against my chest. Got my plexiglass. And I'm going to walk over towards where we'll be setting up. So let's aim it down a tiny bit. So over here I've got nice direct sunlight, again using my body to shade it a little bit. I'm going to put the sheet of paper down, place my microbes across the paper. I've got 3 of them. Some of you guys have 3, some of you have 2. And then put the glass on top, the plexiglass on top. Now I'm going to run back over there and start the timer. So it's still a nice bright day, so we're still going to go with 10 minutes on the timer. But we're going to close this guy up. So this is the last image that I will run a timer for. From now on, you guys can figure out and run the timer yourselves. Oh, that just moved weirdly. Yeah. After we've finished with this image, we are going to process it, and then we will be done for the day. You do, however, have one more sheet of paper in your bag, which you could use to make another image today, or you could save it for tomorrow or the day after. Tomorrow we're going to be working with microbes and cloth. We'll be using the white pieces of cloth, so the blue and white ones, as opposed to the colored pieces of cloth. So if you are able to look at your image, look at the pieces of cloth in a bathroom or tonight when the sun's gone down, when there's no UV light coming in, then you can tell which is which and separate them out. But we're using 2 pieces of the uncolored piece of cloth tomorrow. We'll also be using the construction paper and scissors, so make sure you have scissors ready tomorrow for when we start. And we'll be making our own microbes along with looking at the microbes that we brought along with you. These microbes are laser cut. They're very, very intricately done. And they're taken from an array of different real-life microbes. So these are tiny, tiny microorganisms. We'll be looking at those, and we'll be looking at some other types of things as well, as along with the history of cyanotypes and yeah, other types of things. Still got a little bit more time. I guess the one thing that we didn't really talk too much about is ultraviolet light. So I keep saying that sunlight is good and that you need to keep this paper out of the sunlight when you are not making an exposure. This is because the only type of light it's sensitive to is ultraviolet light, light that comes from the sun. This is also the light that will give you a suntan or a sunburn. Sometimes if it is cloudy outside and I want to make these images, I'll use a large machine that puts off ultraviolet light. We have a room specially designed for that, and you have to start it up and then leave the room as soon as it gets started. I've had students who forget to leave the room and they come back with sunburns on their arm the next day. So you have to be really careful about that. But since most light bulbs do not emit ultraviolet light, these are very safe to have around your house. That said, you want to be careful that you don't accidentally leave them out until the sun comes up. They're sort of like vampires in that way, so you gotta be a little careful with that. Well, let's check to see how much time we have. Got about another 6 minutes left. I'm gonna pull this off and we're gonna look at it a little closer to see how it's changing. So that's sort of interesting, the different colors that it has. So you can see that a little bit of striping on it. That's because this is hand-coated paper. This is paper that I took the solution, the cyanotype solution, and coated it. We're going to look at that later in the week as well. I'll demonstrate how to coat it. You can purchase liquid cyanotype emulsion. fairly cheaply on Amazon. I'll have links to that at a later date, so your parents can purchase that if you're interested in doing more of this. And it's a very, very simple thing to deal with. All you need is a, nighttime, a room where you can control the light. You need some brushes, and you need some water. Some distilled water is preferable, but normal tap water will work as well. And you can hand coat paper, you can hand coat cloth, you can even put this onto wood or almost any material that will take a liquid. Some things work better than others, but it's very flexible and very valuable. If you notice right now, this is actually, I'm filming this the next day, the day after the other one, and the sun it's the morning, so the sun is much lower in the sky, so it's coming at an angle. So something that you might think about if you wanted to, instead of putting it super flat like this, you can put it at a slight angle so it faces towards the sun. The only advantage of that is if there's any three-dimensionality in the objects you placed on top of the paper, then it will not send their shadow at more of an angle. It will keep it nice and flatter to the page. This is a very, very flat image, but if we're using like a pine cone or something, then the angle of the sun to the paper would be, be a big change in what the image looks like. Got about 4 minutes left now. We're going to process this today in the smaller bath, in the Tupperware that I put out, just to show how you can do it in a container that's just a little bit too small for what you need. That said, the bucket is always easier to use. Something large is easier, but if you need to, you can go smaller. You can also just go into the bathroom and just run this under a tap. You don't even need to fill the sink necessarily, as long as you're gentle about it. It will put off a little bit of blue liquid, but that will just wash off the sink if you're, give it a nice wash when you're done. I'll also put links into the video tomorrow for where I am getting the cloth that we're going to use. It's a wonderful company out of Washington, near Seattle, that hand makes the cloth and sends them out, and they do a very good job. You can make cloth yourself using this process. As I said, it's a little more consuming in that it soaks up a lot of liquid, and it's a little harder. I've had some mixed results with making cloth in terms of making good images. I prefer to use their cloth. Making these recordings, you really realize that it's much better to do this process in the morning. Here in Wyoming, the clouds tend to come in the afternoon. The wind comes in the afternoon, so have a lot better luck with sun and with the weather if you work in the morning. Got about 2 minutes left. Image is fading really nicely. Something you might have noticed in your first image, I didn't have it, but some of you might have. If you've picked flowers or plants that have a lot of liquid in them, that are sort of wet, when you put the plexi on them and put them out in the sun, they'll put off liquid, and they'll basically fog the bottom of the plexi. That fog will appear in the image. It will make it a little cloudy and a little more indistinct. So something you can do to deal with that is, as soon as you see the fog, really carefully lift the plexi. Try not to move the stuff underneath it at all. Lift the plexi, just sort of wave it around a tiny bit, let the fog evaporate and put it back down. Usually, I mean, if it's really wet, you'll get more fog, but usually just that first putting off of liquid is done at that point, and then you won't get as much fog from then on. You could also try to pre-do it, as in put your flowers underneath the plexi before you even put the paper out, to sort of fog it out, and then wipe the plexi off and make the image. All right, that's the timer. I'll push stop. So as before, I'm gonna carefully pick this up, just sort of dump the cloth. You can see how very nice image right here. Got the hard blue around the edges and sort of yellow in the middle. I'm gonna press it against my chest, and we're gonna walk over to where our high-tech water baths are. All right, so now I'm just gonna push this in, and if it doesn't fit all the way in, you can sort of curl it a little bit, or even just go back and forth, sort of like a conveyor belt, and get the image all the way in that way. A little bit of the yellow's coming off, as before. Be gentle with it. If you think it's done, pick it up carefully and let it drip, and look to see if there's any blue or yellow liquid coming out of the dripping. Needs just a tiny bit more time. When we do this with a whole bunch of people in person in the tacos camp, we'll set up a bunch of buckets in a row, and the kids will go through from one bucket to the next. That can even be a nice way to do it by yourself. If you set up two buckets, you have a first bucket that gets a little dirty, and then the second bucket is clean water, and you use that for the second rinse. So you can work a couple different ways with this. But this is looking pretty good. It's a tiny bit fogged, so I might have overexposed it a little bit. So maybe 9 minutes might be the perfect amount of time, but 10 minutes is working for us pretty well. And I'm gonna take the image now, put it out to dry. And with that, we're done. So that's it for the cyanotype part today. We will be back to it tomorrow with the cloth and with more talk about microbes and using microbes and making our own microbes. Have a good night, and see you in the morning.